I was at my desk, sipping the coffee my assistant had just dropped off. She'd used that artificial sweetener again, and I hated it, but I made a joke about switching to black tea if she kept this up. My head was full of a frustrating copyright issue that wasn't going anywhere because, as usual, the federal government was dragging its heels on releasing the documents I needed. Their infamous red tape was slowing everything down. I couldn't help but wonder how many desks one letter had to cross before someone decided to do their job. I felt stuck, completely unable to move forward on my next project, and the looming financial losses weren't helping either. With all this political correctness complicating even the simplest tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had passed me by. Just as I was sinking deeper into my thoughts, Grace, my assistant, interrupted me. "There's a young lady here to see you," she said. She didn't give her name but handed me this picture. I took the photo from her hand, and instantly, a wave of dread hit me. Why now? I thought. The picture was of me and Carolyn, my ex-wife, on our wedding day, a snapshot from 18 years ago that I'd rather forget. All those memories of betrayal and heartbreak came rushing back. People always said I returned to town to lick my wounds, and they weren't wrong. Back then, I was too naive about money, power, and trust. But things had changed. "Find out if she's Sophia or Isabella Mitchell," I told Grace, handing her a USB drive in a Ziploc bag I'd been saving for this exact moment. "If she is, show her what's on this drive. If she wants a copy, give her everything and bring the original back to me. Once you're done, come back. I'll answer your questions." At 42, I'd accepted bachelorhood as my reality. My brief and disastrous marriage to Carolyn Davis had left me with some serious trust issues. Nowadays, people had to earn my trust the hard way, and not many managed it. Physically, I was holding up, 6 feet 4 inches, 200 pounds, with a 38-inch waist, thanks to hitting the gym for 2 hours every evening after work. My brown-black hair was starting to show some gray, but I could still turn heads. I was okay with casual relationships, but love and marriage? Absolutely not. I had no interest in repeating that disaster. An hour later, Grace returned, this time with the young lady. She looked determined, like she wouldn't leave without getting what she came for. Her piercing emerald eyes locked onto mine as she sat down, waiting for me to start talking. "Do you know which one it was?" I asked. "Isabella," she replied, her voice steady. "Who is she, and why is she so upset?" Grace continued, clearly sensing this was about to turn into something big. "She cried, saying we've been lied to our entire lives. And if I'm right, he was lied to as well," Isabella explained. Isabella is one of a pair of identical twins. The clip you saw was her mother's final words to me before our first divorce hearing, 7 months before the twins were born. I didn't even find out about them through her, I heard it from friends. The rest of what's on that USB explains what would happen if I ever tried to contact them. Her father, back when he was with the CIA, made sure I was fired from the FBI by framing me. He despised me, and he had the power to ruin my life. And her mother? She divorced me to run off with my former best friend, who she'd been cheating with for months. From what I know, he's their biological father. How did she track me down, and what does she want from me? I asked, my mind spinning. Isabella found an old photo in the attic with your name on it. She Googled you, recognized you, and then uncovered the original marriage certificate and divorce papers. She tracked you down through social media and some other online searches. She's desperate, looking for a bone marrow match for her twin sister, who's running out of time. Why me? I shot back. I'm not their father. How does this even make sense? Isabella suspected something wasn't adding up, so she convinced the doctors to do a DNA test during the bone marrow screening. Turns out, Mr. Mitchell isn't their biological father after all. I stood there, stunned, as Grace's face lit up with a knowing smile, and I could feel tears building in my eyes. If Isabella was right, then my ex had lied to me all those years ago. Could I really be their father? I knew she was related to you the moment I saw her, Grace said, standing up. She has this unmistakable look about her. You ready for the biggest shock of your life, Ryan? I took a breath and replied, send the info on that drive to my publishers. Make sure it gets out without being traced back to me. No one can know it's under my writing name. My life could still be in danger. Tell them it needs to be publicized as quickly as possible. Then, get someone to run a DNA test. If I am their father, I want solid proof before I confront their mother. If it turns out I'm right, I'll need a damn good lawyer. Clear my schedule. I need to get to Sophia's hospital right away. Now, where's Isabella? Isabella, come in and introduce yourself, Grace called out. Isabella walked into the room, and the second I saw her, I knew. She was the spitting image of my younger sister at 16. My throat tightened, and both of us started crying almost immediately. Grace, being her efficient self, snapped a few photos of the moment, knowing it was life-changing, and then left us to talk. Isabella, you've got a blood test appointment at 1. They promised to rush the results, and I charged it to the company card, Grace said when she returned. I've also set up a meeting with your sister, Rachel, at a restaurant at 3. I reserved a private table so you can have a serious talk. Rachel knows there's big family news coming. I stood there, emotionally overwhelmed, watching Isabella walk towards me. I had a million questions swirling in my head, but for now, I just hugged her. I wasn't ready to process the idea of being a father. Isabella was trembling too, and I could tell she was just as unsure as I was. We left the office quietly, trying to take things one step at a time, just trying to figure everything out. After arranging for the clinic to email the results, we headed out for a late lunch. I found out that Isabella had skipped school and driven all day to get here, only stopping to rest at a station. I was furious that she'd taken such a risk, but I kept my mouth shut. It struck me that I might already be acting like an overprotective dad, which was something I never expected from myself. At the same time, it was exactly the kind of reckless thing I would have done at her age. When we arrived at the restaurant, I noticed Rachel's car parked outside. I know we're here to meet your sister, but why did Grace arrange this without running it by you first? Isabella asked. You're about to understand what Grace and I saw the first moment we laid eyes on you, I said. It'll explain why we believe you and Sophia are my daughters, and why I was stunned and the DNA test came back positive. Can I call you Dad? Isabella asked, her voice soft but hopeful. I chuckled and smiled. I'd love that. We were at Cell's, a nice family restaurant that was a definite step up from Red Lobster and known for its great service. The owner and hostess greeted us immediately and led us to a private booth. I ordered a bottle of champagne, knowing we'd need it, along with some extra tissues, because I had a feeling emotions were about to run high. Rachel had her back to us as we entered, and I told Isabella to hang back while I went over to break the news. Hey, sis, thanks for coming, I said, smiling as I approached. Rachel looked up, her expression curious. You look like you've got something up your sleeve. What's going on? Stand up, Rachel. There's someone I want you to meet, I said as Isabella walked forward. This is Carolyn's daughter, Isabella. Rachel turned and froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was as if she was staring at a younger version of herself. They had the same long brown hair, those high cheekbones, small ears, and light blue eyes that looked almost identical. Oh my God, Rachel gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Adam, you should have warned me. This is unreal. How long have you known? About 5 hours, Isabella chimed in, her voice shaky with emotion. I showed up at his office earlier today. Grace and Dad figured it out right away, and now seeing you, I understand why. The server returned with the tissues, catching on that this was more than just a casual get-together. Rachel, through her tears, explained that we'd need a bigger table since 3 more people were joining us. The hostess quickly moved us to a larger spot. Rachel urgently called her husband, telling him to get here immediately, and contacted our parents, insisting they come as well. Mom, understandably worried, asked what was going on, but Rachel told her she couldn't explain it over the phone. The emotional roller coaster was in full swing when I received a message from Grace. The news had been published, and it would be hitting the 6 o'clock broadcast. We were just starting to unwind with our first glass of champagne when Rachel's husband and my parents arrived. My dad's booming voice made me grin. "There better be a damn good reason for this," he shouted, his usual bluster breaking the tension. Rachel and I stood to greet them. "Mom, Dad, David. I want you to meet Carolyn's daughter, Isabella Mitchell," Rachel said with a mixture of pride and excitement. My mom's face immediately lit up with joy as she recognized the resemblance. She had always longed for a granddaughter. My dad, usually the tough guy, stood speechless for a moment. When he finally found his voice, he said, "I can see the family resemblance, but I've got to admit, this is a lot to process." Mom, too emotional to speak, sat down next to Isabella and held her hand tightly, her eyes filled with happiness. Dad, ever the celebrator, quickly ordered 2 more bottles of champagne. Once our glasses were topped off again, I stood up. "I think I need to explain a few things," I said as Isabella picked up my phone to record. I told them about how Isabella and I had met earlier that day and recapped the whirlwind of events. Dad stood up afterward, his face softening. "Isabella, we don't need a DNA test to see what's plain as day. Welcome to the family. You've got 2 more aunts who are already dying to meet you. Just promise me you'll always think of this family as your home." Isabella, still emotional, took the phone and began speaking. "I came here searching for the truth, unsure of what I would find. Today has turned my world upside down, but it's also done the same for my dad. Neither of us had any idea until now. Meeting Aunt Rachel showed me what real family and unconditional love are all about. My twin sister Sophia is going to be so happy." As I looked around the table, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. Even Dad, the guy who never showed much emotion, was misty-eyed. My mom, holding up 2 fingers, started crying even louder. I paused the recording to capture everyone's tearful but joyful reactions. Isabella saved her and Sophia's contact information on my phone, and then she texted Sophia, showing me the message she sent. "If what we believe is true, the DNA test will confirm it. Watch the 6 o'clock news. Love, your twin." Mom, still in shock, asked for more proofs. Isabella pulled out her phone and showed her photos of herself and Sophia. Mom immediately asked for copies so she could save them on her laptop, then proudly displayed them for everyone to see. That's when it hit me, nobody knew where Isabella was. Just then, my phone rang. It was Sophia. I excused myself, moving to a quieter corner of the restaurant. Dad caught my expression and gave me a concerned look. Isabella mouthed, "It's my sister," and Dad nodded in understanding. I answered the call. "Hello, Sophia. It's your dad. I saw the video, and I had to call. Mom won't be home until after 7 o'clock because she's stopping by the police station to check on Isabella. I'm acting like I know nothing, but the police were at the house earlier and left a card. What do I do?" "Tell him to watch the 6 o'clock news and pay close attention to anything about me," I instructed. "You can talk once your mom's out of the house, and show him the video. Give him my number but make sure he texts before calling. He'll get it once he sees the news. Once we have the DNA results, Isabella and I may bring the whole family over," I added. "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, sounding both confused and curious. "I mean, once the family knows, they'll want to help. If I'm not a match for the bone marrow, someone else might be." "Are you serious?" Just like that? She asked, sounding doubtful. With our family? No doubt. You'll see, I replied with a small laugh. We may be strangers now, but that won't last. We talked a bit more, and by the end of the call, Sophia was crying tears of relief. After ordering dinner, I explained the situation to everyone. The room buzzed with excitement as phones lit up, with everyone spreading the word and rallying potential donors. My mom instantly took charge, organizing everything like a general in a war room. Isabella, how'd you get here? My dad asked, curious but concerned. She laughed. I drove my old '94 Voyager van. That thing's barely holding together. It's parked outside Dad's office. Dad shook his head firmly. Take that van to my dealership first thing in the morning. There's no way I'm letting you drive back in that thing. It's a miracle you even made it here. I couldn't help but grin. At her age, you didn't have much more sense than she does. Determined, but reckless. What are you planning to give her? She can pick out a new one, he said with a smile. If I get to choose, it'd be a 4x4. I love being outdoors, Isabella said with a grin. Dad beamed. That's perfect. We all love the outdoors. If the weather's right, you'll find us fishing, camping, or hunting. Dad started reminiscing about the summer I learned to water ski and barefoot, sharing stories like he was the king of storytelling, keeping everyone entertained. It was like a walk down memory lane, full of the good times. Both of my parents insisted that Isabella stay with them for the night, making it clear that it wouldn't look right if she stayed with me alone. After dinner, Dad drove them to Isabella's van, then brought it back to their house. Mom was absolutely ecstatic, already planning how she was going to spoil her newfound granddaughter, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Dad stayed up until 1 a.m., waiting for them to get home, probably just as excited as she was. Around 10 o'clock that night, I got a call from the police investigator. He told me it took him 2 hours to run a background check on me, and the media was already buzzing with questions about the information I had released. We went over the situation in detail, and he seemed satisfied after watching the video of 3 generations together. I explained that we were speeding up the DNA testing to confirm Isabella was my daughter and assured him she was safe with my parents. Once everything was confirmed, I planned to return to see if I could be a bone marrow match for Sophia. I asked him to help buy us some time and promised to keep him updated. Later, Sophia told me he had reported back to her about our conversation. I was facing my past head-on again, but this time with a completely different perspective. I wasn't going to be scared off by the power or money of my ex-wife's family. This time, I had the truth on my side, and I was ready to use the media, the courts, and anything else I could to get justice. I didn't want revenge, I wanted what was right, and I had the resources and proof to back it up. I wasn't just taking on 4 people, I was prepared to go up against the federal government if I had to. The next morning, I was in my office early, making sure the schedule changes wouldn't impact anything critical and setting up tasks for Grace while I'd be away. Grace, acting like an overprotective mom, kept refreshing the email, asking me about every detail of the previous day. Honestly, I didn't mind. I never got tired of watching Grace Anderson. In her youth, she must have been the dream of every teenage boy. Her naturally styled brown hair framed her soft features perfectly, and those piercing emerald green eyes were still captivating. I often found myself admiring her, grateful she never caught me doing it. Finally, the email came through with the DNA results. Grace opened it, printed it out, and practically shouted, "It's confirmed. You are her father." Her excitement filled the room. Without hesitation, she called the lab and had the results sent to Sophia's specialist. Then, she began vetting the toughest litigation lawyers in New York. After researching a few, she picked the best and arranged a Skype call. The lawyer was confident, agreeing to work on a percentage basis, seeing this case as a slam dunk. Armed with DNA evidence, We were going after my ex-wife, her husband, and her parents for denying me my parental rights. The court order that had kept me away would be overturned, exposing their deliberate actions. Whether or not the supposed contract on my life was real, it would serve as proof of their attempts to intimidate me. The lawyer saw this as a massive case, even before bringing the government into the mix. I told Grace to send the dusty gray box from my safe to the lawyer. Inside was the critical evidence that Carolyn's father had tried to destroy my career and marriage. It had taken me years to gather, slicing through layer after layer of bureaucracy. Eventually, a police officer leaked a video that reframed the story, turning it into a media sensation about a runaway daughter reconnecting with her biological father to save her sister. Later that day, I called Mom. "It's confirmed, Mom. I have 2 daughters. Thank God." I felt the weight lift off me as I said it. "Be ready to leave by 7 a.m. from the car lot. I'll inform the rest of the family." "Have you told your daughters yet?" she asked. We were heading to Igo, New York, in a fully loaded, nearly new Ford Explorer, leading a convoy. My parents were in a tour bus behind us, with 33 other vehicles following closely. As we got moving, my phone rang. Isabella answered and put it on speaker. "CNN is tracking you," Sophia informed us after a brief greeting. "There's a tour bus with a sign that says, 'The Greens are coming.' 1 out of 141 vehicles should be a match. We have the DNA results confirming he's our father," Isabella said confidently. "I'm driving a 2-year-old Ford Explorer." "Dad said if it was true, a lot of family would come," Sophia replied, "but I didn't expect this. I've never felt this kind of hope before. I don't remember the last time I felt this good. The Green family has spread the word, and people came out of the woodwork. This morning I met so many relatives, it's going to take me forever to remember all their names. I've met first, second, even third cousins. I'm so proud I want to change my last name to Green. I had no idea families like this even existed," Isabella chimed in. "I was so overwhelmed by it all, I almost drove off the road. It's such an amazing experience that I've decided to write about it in my next book." Isabella and Sophia were still chatting about all the new relatives when Sophia suddenly said she had to go. Her mother had just walked in. "Dad, are you okay?" Isabella asked, noticing my silence. "You seemed really emotional. How do you think I feel?" I answered, my voice heavy with emotion. "I just found out I have 2 daughters who were raised by my ex-wife and an old friend behind my back. One of you is full of life and energy, while the other is hanging on by a thread. And you, so strong, so independent, you're moving mountains like it's nothing. You're just like me, and you want to take my name," I said, my chest swelling with pride. "Isabella," I continued, "I've been so focused on saving your sister's life that I didn't realize the impact this might be having on you. I wasn't a good match because of a genetic issue from my side of the family, but the emotional weight of all of this. I know it's a lot. Can you forgive me?" "For what?" Isabella asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "For coming into my life and shaking everything up?" "No, Dad, that's what life is about. You've given us another person to love, and you've given me the chance to have a real father." Tears were rolling down my face as I spoke. "Your grandparents are over the moon. My mom sees herself in you, and that means everything to her. You and your sister have become the light of her life. She's been spoiling both of you like there's no tomorrow. Every time she buys me something, she gets something for Sue too, laughing about how she's got years of spoiling to catch up on." "That sounds just like Mom," Isabella said, smiling. "Good luck trying to keep her at a distance. I've tried, and it doesn't work." "I know," I said with a chuckle. "She's impossible to push away, and trust me, you wouldn't want to." "Rachel and my other sisters will be talking about this for weeks," I said, smiling. By the time they're done, this whole thing will be a family legend passed down for years. We soon found out that as soon as Carolyn saw the live news feed about our arrival, she started having severe panic attacks. The lies she had built her life around were finally collapsing. Feeling a new sense of power, Sophia decided it was time to confront her. "Mom, why did you hide the truth about who our real dad is?" Sophia demanded, her voice steady but sharp. When Carolyn didn't respond, Sophia pressed harder. "You kept the truth from us and made decisions about our lives that weren't yours to make. What gave you the right to play God? Even Dad didn't know. If Isabella hadn't discovered him and dug up the truth, would you have let me die?" Carolyn sat there, speechless, never expecting her carefully constructed lies to unravel like this. Her father had always despised me, and he did everything in his power to drive me away. She didn't have any answers now. Just then, Sophia's doctor walked in. "We've received DNA from a man you didn't list as a contact, and it confirms he's Sophia's biological father. He's coming in tomorrow to be tested as a potential bone marrow donor, and given the situation, we'll have security in place to protect him." "Mom," Sophia said, her voice stronger now, "my biological dad is coming with 140 of our relatives, just in case he's not a match. He's giving me a fighting chance." "Why?" Carolyn asked, stunned. "To him, blood is thicker than water. It doesn't matter that I'm a stranger to them, I'm family, and family comes first," Sophia replied, her eyes narrowing. "You must have known we look just like his mother. Watch this video, it'll clear up any doubts." Carolyn had no choice but to watch the video of me meeting Isabella. The resemblance across 3 generations was undeniable. There was no room for denial anymore. Her daughters had all the proof they needed, and her schemes were collapsing fast. The truth was out. Just as the video ended, a man appeared at the door to Sophia's room, asking for Carolyn. When she confirmed her identity, he handed her a thick legal envelope. "You've been served," he said before walking away. Carolyn fell to her knees, sobbing, but Sophia, furious, didn't feel a shred of sympathy. "Mom, why did Grandpa put a contract on my biological dad's life?" Sophia demanded, knowing full well she wouldn't get an answer. Meanwhile, Matthew Mitchell had just left a corporate meeting when a process server handed him a similar set of legal papers. He sat down in the reception area, scanning the documents. The first was a lawsuit from me, suing him and Carolyn for denying my legal rights as the father of my daughters. The second was against Matthew, Carolyn, and her parents, accusing them of conspiring to destroy my marriage and career. It was clear I wasn't seeking revenge, I was after justice. I was demanding full custody of my daughters. In the lawsuit, I argued that if Isabella hadn't found me, I would have never known about them, and that moral abandonment could be proven in court. The media coverage was already making it difficult for them to argue otherwise. Matthew's mind flashed back to when we were university roommates and football teammates. We had both pursued Carolyn, but I had won her heart. He had even stood by me as my best man when I married her. But Carolyn's father had never approved of me, using my background as an excuse to interfere. He convinced Matthew to pursue Carolyn, and Matthew, under her father's influence, agreed. With her father's help, I was assigned to long FBI missions, leaving Carolyn and Matthew alone. Eventually, they became lovers during one of my 2-month undercover assignments. When I returned, her father confronted me with video evidence of their affair. Carolyn, unaware she was pregnant at the time, thought the missed periods were from stress. Her father, delighted, encouraged me to file for divorce immediately. When the twins were born, it was clear they were mine, but by then, Carolyn's father had falsely accused me and destroyed my career. It took me years to clear my name, but by then, I had lost everything. Carolyn and Matthew married and had 2 sons. The unedited tapes, now part of my evidence, revealed the full extent of the conspiracy between Matthew and Carolyn's father. Matthew sat there, wondering how Carolyn would react when this truth became public. By 9 p.m., after a grueling 14-hour drive, Isabella and I finally reached our final stop for the night. Exhausted, we ordered a light meal to our rooms and passed out almost immediately. We were up at 5 a.m. the next morning, thanks to a wake-up call, ready to get back on the road. Isabella and I left early because I had a confidential meeting with a police officer and an FBI agent. The rest of our convoy left around 7 a.m. for the 6-hour drive ahead. Isabella dropped me off at the Igo Police Department, where I met Detective Thomas Grant and FBI agent Ryan Davis. We discussed Carolyn's father's interrogation for about an hour and a half. I handed over my lawyer's contact information and left them a USB drive containing all of my evidence. They placed me under official protection and arranged for a security escort while I was in town. Afterward, I went to the hospital to have my blood drawn for testing to see if I could be a bone marrow match for Sophia. As I neared Sophia's room, I overheard Isabella and Sophia talking. A nurse recognized me from my books and asked me to sign one for her. When I finally entered the room, Isabella's eyes lit up. "Dad," she exclaimed in surprise. Sophia looked frail, her skin hanging loosely, showing the toll her illness had taken on her body. But despite everything, her eyes were full of hope, and her smile was as bright as ever. "Sophia," I said gently, "they're rushing the test results. We should know within 30 minutes. The rest of the family is checking into their hotels. My parents are at the hospital right now, getting tested as well. If more than one person is a match, the doctor wants to do a simultaneous double transplant." Tears streamed down Sophia's face, and I sat on the edge of her bed, wrapping my arms around her as she cried. Isabella, always the thoughtful one, snapped a picture of us together, both of us in tears of joy and relief. I was overwhelmed. I had gone from not knowing these girls to sitting here, holding my daughter, knowing there was hope. Seeing Isabella and Sophia together for the first time made it all hit me at once, their strength, their courage, and everything they had gone through. "Grandma, Grandpa, come meet my sister," Isabella called out, excited. For the next hour, the 5 of us talked and laughed, sharing stories as if we had known each other forever. Then Sophia's doctor came in, grinning from ear to ear. "My mother and I are both perfect matches for Sophia," I announced proudly. Dr. Spencer then asked if we were ready to check in for surgery at 6 a.m. the next day. Both my dad and I whispered, "Thank God. We've been praying for this miracle the whole way up, don't they need my parents' permission?" Sophia asked, clearly surprised. "Normally, yes," Dr. Spencer began, "but we received a court order this morning, thanks to Mr. Green. It allows us to move forward if he or any relative is a match. The judge determined that your mother and her husband weren't prioritizing your best interests. Mr. Green has agreed to cover all non-insurance costs." Isabella grinned and said, "I'm not surprised, sis. After what Mom and Matthew pulled, Dad had no choice but to use the courts to avoid any delays." Just then, a security guard knocked on the door and told us that we were about to be featured on national news. Sophia quickly switched the TV to CNN, and there I was, revealed as the author of a popular book series valued at $40 million. Isabella, Sophia, and even the doctor were dumbfounded, while my parents stared at me in shock. They had no idea. They always thought I was just an independent corporate financial advisor. "My God, Dad!" Sophia exclaimed. "I've read all your books, they're incredible." I chuckled and explained, after my life fell apart, I had to reinvent myself. Writing became my therapy. The success of my first book was the turning point, and things just grew from there. I write about real-world events, social issues, and morality, no matter how uncomfortable it might make people feel. For the first time in 15 years, I checked into a hospital, this time alongside my mother. Sophia had wanted to share a room with me, but hospital security wouldn't allow it, so Isabella spent the evening running between all three rooms, mine, Sophia's, and Grandma's. My dad, meanwhile, kept calling relatives to update them on the situation. When Carolyn and Matthew arrived after work, they were met with a cold reception. Sophia told them she was being prepped for surgery the next morning for a double bone marrow transplant, courtesy of a court order. "How is that possible?" Carolyn asked, her voice trembling. "Mom," Sophia said calmly, "my bio dad and his mother are perfect matches, and both are donating so I can fully recover." Sophia continued, "By the way, Mom, do you know who Nathan Wallace is?" "You know, your favorite author." Carolyn nodded, confused. "Well, Nathan Wallace is actually Adam Davis, my bio dad." The color drained from both Carolyn and Matthew's faces. They had been hoping this entire legal battle would just fade away, but now they were realizing that I wasn't after money. I wanted justice. And with my net worth and the legal backing I had, they knew they were in trouble. I'd always believed in law and order, which made me a damn good agent before they destroyed my career. "Mom, did you know your father's been in FBI custody all day?" Sophia asked, her voice hardening. "You might want to check in with Grandma to see if he's home. Can you explain why any of this is happening?" Carolyn, overwhelmed, had no response. Meanwhile, Isabella was somewhere in the hospital, either in my room or with Grandma Patterson. Carolyn and Matthew could find her if they wanted to, but it was clear they were in over their heads. Not long after, a security guard knocked and peeked into my room. "Mr. Green, do you know these two?" he asked, gesturing to Carolyn and Matthew, standing awkwardly in the hallway. Isabella, always quick on her feet, answered, "Miss Fiancé, didn't you see my ring?" she quipped, letting them into the room. "Dad, I wouldn't trust these two for a second. They're just here to cover their tracks." "You don't know the half of it," Grace chimed in. "Your dad's lawyer has video evidence of your stepfather receiving a check from your grandfather. It was payment for breaking up your parents' marriage. In exchange, he'd manage your grandparents' finances for a 3% annual fee." Carolyn, her face pale, demanded, "How do you know this? And who are you?" "Mom, this is Grace Anderson," Isabella said firmly. "She's Dad's fiancée, and she's an amazing researcher. I trust her far more than I trust you." Carolyn's face fell. Her daughters were slipping away from her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Grace had spoken the truth, and I backed her up. I'd already instructed my lawyer to hand over all the video and audio recordings to the FBI, including a letter from Carolyn's father admitting to paying for the recordings just to spite me. He never cared about the cost or who he had to trample over to get what he wanted, I said, locking eyes with Carolyn. She turned toward Matthew, silently begging for some kind of denial, but his guilty expression said it all. In that moment, Carolyn realized just how deep the loss was when I walked away, the only man who had ever truly loved her. "Grace, always direct," offered, "Carolyn, here's some advice. Don't let anyone manipulate you the way I did." Carolyn sighed, looking broken. She turned to me and said, "Adam, I need to talk to you alone after the surgery. I need some time to think." "Isabella, would you walk me to my car?" Isabella nodded, understanding. "I'll be back soon. Mom and I need to talk about a few things." "Grace, stay with Dad until I return." We watched as they walked away. Once Carolyn was out of sight, she broke down in tears, and Grace and I knew she had finally realized the full scope of what had happened. Matthew, a man who had always lived a comfortable, privileged life, was paralyzed with fear. The truth had come out, and it was destroying their world. Carolyn would never be able to trust him again. "Adam," Matthew began, his voice shaking. "I've dreaded this day. I never thought you'd come back. If we had met by chance, maybe I could have ignored it. But this? I didn't see this coming. It's best if I just leave and say nothing more." And with that, he left, leaving me and Grace alone. I turned to her, noticing for the first time how her cheeks flushed as I looked at her. I realized then that I was finally opening myself up. But I couldn't help wondering, was she playing me, or was she showing her true feelings? Did I see her as just a friend, or was there something more? Either way, my daughters had awakened something in me. I had been living in the shadows for too long, finding joy in their excitement rather than creating my own. Grace, we need to talk while I'm recovering, I said gently. These past few days have made me realize something. I've been sitting on the sidelines instead of getting in the game. Grace looked at me, her voice softening. Adam, when I went through my divorce, you stepped in when no one else did. My kids were still young, and you've been more of a father to them than their biological dad ever was. From baseball games to father-daughter dances, you've been there every step of the way. I know why you pay me more than most people would. It's because you care. You want to make sure my kids are cared for. She continued, her voice full of emotion. On their birthdays, you go all out, making sure they feel special. During summer breaks, you take us on trips, creating memories that last a lifetime. You've been answering their questions and supporting them like a father should. They love you, and you love them. Your only issue is your fear of commitment, Grace said, hitting me straight in the heart. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She was right, and deep down, I knew it. Her words, along with what Isabella had said earlier, echoed in my head. I walked over to Grace and sat beside her, taking her hand gently in mine, searching her eyes as I gathered my thoughts. Carolyn betrayed me, her father intimidated me, and my best friend stabbed me in the back. I've lived under constant threat, putting myself in protection mode for years. It wasn't until a few days ago that I realized I've been hiding. Now that I see it, can we go on our first real date, or is it too late for us? I asked, hopeful but uncertain. Grace laughed softly. Took you long enough, you old fool, she said before leaning in and kissing me. I'm texting our kids right now to let them know we're a couple and that we're working things out. I smirked. Pretty confident, aren't you? I texted Isabella to check in, thanking her for everything, asking if things were okay with Carolyn. She quickly responded, Mom didn't know. She's taking it hard and won't be back tonight. Let Sophia know. With that, Grace and I headed up to Sophia's room. After introducing Grace as my girlfriend, we explained everything that had happened earlier and showed her Isabella's text. Just as we finished, my sister Rachel walked in with a knowing smile. I had to meet her, Rachel said, nodding at Grace. So, Grace, what are you doing here? Before I could say anything, Rachel figured it out. He finally got it, didn't he? She said, grinning. Took him long enough, Grace laughed. Sophia, this is your Aunt Rachel, I said, and that's Uncle David coming in behind her. You'll soon find out, we don't hold back in this family. We speak our minds, like it or not. Excusing myself, I walked to the nurse's station and texted Isabella to ask what kind of pizza Sophia liked. She replied quickly, she likes everything except anchovies. I ordered 3 extra-large pizzas and some 2-liter bottles of soda, then called my dad, asking him to bring Mom up in about 30 minutes for an impromptu pizza party. We knew we were pushing the no eating for 8 hours before surgery rule, but sometimes you just have to break the rules a bit. Sure enough, the head nurse came in to settle us down but ended up leaving with a slice of pizza. Later, she stopped me in the hallway, smiling. What you did lifted the spirits of the whole floor. Thank you. At 4 a.m., it was time for Mom and me to get ready for the operation. We held on to each other, sharing strength, until they wheeled us into the operating room. I stayed awake as long as I could, but soon the medication took over, and everything went black. When I woke up, it was all over. The waiting and praying had begun. Dr. Spencer soon informed everyone that the bone marrow transfer had gone well, but it would take some time to know if it had been successful. Thankfully, it was. With that news, most of the family started preparing to head home. Grace is the worst patient ever, I joked as I lay in bed, still groggy from the anesthesia. You're like a bull in a china shop, impatient, unruly, and miserable, Grace teased. Keep acting up, and you'll earn yourself a bad reputation. She then updated me on my mom, telling me she was doing well. Once I was stable, Grace handed me my phone. The first messages I saw were from her kids, asking when she was getting her engagement ring and when they'd get to meet their new sisters. Grace, your kids are smart, I said, showing her the texts. She smiled, her eyes softening. I told them I was here with you after the surgery, and of course, they asked a million questions. Once the whole story came out, they weren't surprised. They said, Mom, he's always treated us like his own. They envy us for having him as our dad, Grace continued, tears welling up in her eyes as she read the messages. They've always seen you as their real father. Well, I guess we won't have a long engagement, I said with a grin. Have you heard from the twins? I asked. Isabella and their mother are with Sophia right now. She's doing well, considering everything. Even though she's still on medication, she's got a lot of questions, Grace explained. Isabella told her about the pizza party, and Sophia couldn't believe how much she looks like her aunt and grandmother. She's excited for a girls' day out with them once she's feeling better. Get me my pants, I insisted. I need to see her myself and check on Mom too. The nurses tried to stop me, saying it was too soon after surgery, but I wasn't having it. So off we went, hand in hand, making our way to Sophia's room. Surprisingly, the pain was manageable, and as soon as I walked in, I could see the improvement in Sophia. Her complexion was brighter, and the spark in her eyes nearly brought me to tears. Who are Chloe and Logan Anderson? Isabella asked, looking up from her phone. They're my kids, 13 and 11, Grace answered. Why? I got a friend request from both of them this morning on Facebook. So did Sophia. Both of you need to read what they sent me, I said, handing Isabella my phone. She read the messages, smiled, and then passed it to Sophia. I'll need that back to add their phone numbers to my contacts, I said with a wink. Just then, Carolyn asked if she could speak to me privately, so we headed to the waiting room. Adam, she began, her voice heavy with regret, I had a long talk with my mother last night. She admitted she always remembered how much my dad hated you, but she never thought he'd take it this far. My daughters have made it clear, they want to finish the school year here and then move in with you. They want their last name changed to yours. They said what Matthew and I did is unforgivable. Carolyn continued, her voice cracking, I can't argue with them. They even said they'd take me to court if I refused. They don't trust me anymore, and honestly, I don't blame them. Will you take them? I nodded. You know my family would never let me say no, no matter how I feel. I'll take them gladly, and so will Grace. We'll just need to find a bigger place. I'll drop the suit against you if you agree to joint custody. I added, the lawsuit against the rest of your family will still move forward, but the twins are old enough to decide the rest for themselves. Carolyn agreed to joint custody, and although I offered to pay for the name change, she declined. We walked back into Sophia's room together. The girls watched us closely, sensing something had changed. Grace, I said with a grin, looks like we're going to need at least a 6-bedroom house. Grace smiled back as the girls squealed with excitement. Carolyn spoke up, girls, your father and I have agreed. You're getting your wishes. If Grace is okay with it, I'll call the lawyer tomorrow to start the legal process for your name change. Adam, Grace teased, are you really ready for this? A house full of teenagers? No one's ever truly ready for that, but we'll adapt, I said, chuckling. I'm still getting used to the idea of 2 daughters carrying my name. Make that 4, Grace said, her eyes twinkling. Chloe and Tim want you to adopt them. They're already signing their names as green. Call James Baker's firm to start the paperwork, I said, feeling the weight of the decisions we were making. Then text the kids to let them know our plans. We'll need to figure out which areas have the best schools so we know where to start looking for our new home. Isabella, always quick to act, picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and dialed on speaker. Hello? Chloe answered cautiously. Who is this? This is Isabella, your soon-to-be older sister. Is Logan with you? Isabella explained. Prove it. I can't just take your word for it, Chloe said firmly. Dad taught us not to take calls or messages from people we don't know without proof. Seriously, is this a scam? Grace stepped in, smiling. Chloe, it's me, honey. Adam and I are getting married. You're talking to Adam's daughter, Isabella. We're all going to be green soon. Sophia and Isabella are changing their last names, and your dad is starting the adoption process to make you both green, too. Awesome. Logan chimed in from the background. Tell Dad it's about time. How's Sophia? We've been waiting for updates. Grace and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us silently appreciating this first conversation of our blended family. She squeezed my hand in silent support. I'm getting better, Sophia said, her voice sounding hopeful. So far, so good. I'll text you both my number so we can stay in touch. Sophia, Isabella, Logan began, his voice growing serious. Our dad is the only father we've ever known. Our bio dad left before we even knew him. Your dad has always been there for us, better than any of our friends' parents. Mom's been in love with him for a long time. When we all come together, we have to accept that we're siblings now, nothing more, nothing less, Chloe added. Logan and I won't let anything mess with the family unity. Both of my daughters nodded, understanding the gravity of their new siblings' words. Grace, her eyes wet with tears, whispered to me, they've really embraced your values and principles. You should be proud of them. I am, I replied, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride swelling in my chest. After saying our goodbyes for the moment, Grace and I made our way to see my mom. When we walked in, we caught both of my parents by surprise. Dad noticed the look on Grace's face and smiled knowingly. Mom, I began, you're already up and about. Have you seen Sophia? How is she? She's improving, Mom said, looking relieved. Her complexion is better, and she's in good spirits, but it's still early. We'll see. We need to have a serious conversation if you both have time, I said. We're not going anywhere. Let's hear it, Dad responded, settling in for what he sensed was big news. Sophia and Isabella will be living with me after the school year ends. They're going to change their last name to Green, I explained. Carolyn agreed to joint custody and the name change. It was the girls' idea. That's wonderful news, they both said in unison. But there's more, Grace added, smiling. Your son has finally decided to make an honest woman out of me. Helen, are you ready to help plan a wedding? Mom's eyes filled with happy tears, and Dad's grin stretched from ear to ear. They didn't need to say anything. We could tell they wholeheartedly approved. I'll also be adopting Chloe and Logan, I added. They'll take my last name, and Grace and I will start house hunting as soon as we get back. What finally made you come to your senses? Dad asked, chuckling. We all knew how you two felt about each other. I've been trying to get your mother to knock some sense into you for years. Samuel Green, behave yourself. You're not on the car lot selling a vehicle, Mom scolded playfully. Then she turned to Grace, her eyes sparkling. Have you thought about your wedding plans? We haven't talked about it much yet, Grace replied, but since we're blending 3 families, it should be a family affair. I was thinking Rachel could be my maid of honor, Adam's best man, his brothers-in-law as ushers, Sophia and Isabella as bridesmaids, Chloe as the flower girl, and Logan as the ring bearer. "Dad, would you walk me down the aisle, along with my father?" "That depends on who's footing the bill," Dad laughed. "And if the reception will be stocked with Ryan Logans." "What do you think, Adam?" Grace asked with a grin. "It's perfect. It'll bring us all together." "If that's what you want, let's do it," I replied, my heart full. A thought crossed my mind. Should we invite Carolyn? I wondered aloud. Both of my parents shot that idea down with a firm, "No, Mom, Dad, hear me out," I began. "In the coming weeks, the media is going to expose a lot. I'm suing the federal government, Carolyn's parents, and her husband. But I believe Carolyn was just as much a victim as I was. I paid the price years ago, and now she's paying in ways we can't even imagine. She thinks she's lost her daughters forever. Inviting her might help the girls and her rebuild their relationship, help them move past everything," I explained. My parents exchanged a glance, surprised by my suggestion, while Grace looked at me in awe. "Where did that wisdom come from?" my dad asked, genuinely impressed. "These last few days have taught me a lot," I replied, holding Grace's hand. Isabella's arrival made me realize what truly matters in life. After returning to my room, exhaustion from the surgery overtook me, and I quickly fell asleep. Grace stayed by my side, watching the news. It wasn't long before she filled me in on the headlines. Lucas Davis and Matthew Mitchell had both been arrested for lying to the FBI, and the person behind the contract on my life had turned state's evidence. My lawyer had released details of my firing from the FBI, prompting an internal investigation. When I woke up, Grace shared the news, and Dr. Spencer informed us that my mom and I would be released the next day. "You'll need follow-ups to get your stitches removed," he said. "Sophia's doing better than we expected. The real test will be how she responds once she's weaned off her meds." We caught up with my parents, who decided to stay in the city until Sophia was fully on the road to recovery. They planned to fly back with us on the private plane, while the bus driver prepared to head back over the next few days. The media tore apart the web of lies, deceit, and political games that had destroyed my marriage and career. For an entire day, the news dissected how Carolyn's father manipulated her, feeding her falsehoods to push me out. Carolyn was under intense scrutiny from the public. Grace and I went to visit Sophia one last time before heading home. Dr. Spencer proudly informed us that she was on track for a full recovery. Meanwhile, someone high up clearly wasn't happy with the negative press surrounding the FBI's past dealings with me. The security clearance my publisher and I had been waiting on was suddenly approved, and within 2 weeks, over 1 million hard copies of my new book would be hitting the shelves. I had 2 signed first editions of my latest book delivered overnight. After putting my signature inside, Grace wrapped them up, and we tucked them away in a shopping bag, making sure Isabella would be there when we visited Sophia. "Your dad and I have set the wedding date for the first weekend in August," Grace announced, smiling brightly. "Aunt Rachel will be my maid of honor, and I was wondering if you two would be my bridesmaids." Sophia's eyes lit up immediately. "Absolutely," she exclaimed. "Grace, when I first walked into Dad's office, I was scared out of my mind. But you recognized me right away and said, 'You're Carolyn's daughter. How are we going to handle this?' It shocked me how you accepted me from day one. I'd be honored to be in your wedding, and honestly, I'd love to call you Mom." The 3 of them embraced in a tight hug, and Sophia, despite her condition, jumped out of bed with excitement. After things settled down, I pulled out the gifts and handed each of them a signed first edition of my book with a special inscription, "To one of the 2 prettiest ladies who call me Dad, with love, Nathan Wallace, aka Adam Davis." Sophia was over the moon as she unwrapped hers. It was my biggest book yet, over 600 pages, and her face radiated with pride, knowing it hadn't even been released yet. She flipped open the cover, read my note, and immediately burst into tears. Dad, you've already done so much for me. I didn't need this, she sobbed, rushing into my arms. Before you came into my life, the doctors said I had only a few days left. Isabella knew it too. I don't know why she went into the attic, but I'm so thankful she did, because it brought us you. She clung to me tightly as Isabella looked on, tears brimming in her eyes. Dad, you should know, Isabella started, her voice full of emotion. Dr. Spencer believes that if Sophia had only received one transplant, it wouldn't have worked. The double transplant shocked her system into responding. She's gained 10 pounds in the last 6 days. She paused for a moment, then added, I didn't know if you would come, but you didn't hesitate. You brought a whole tribe with you. Thanks to you and our family, I'm getting my best friend back. I smiled at Isabella's words but decided to shift the mood slightly. How's your mom holding up? I asked gently. She's filed for divorce and is seeing a therapist to deal with a lifetime of lies. She finally understands what you went through, and she's ashamed, Sophia said quietly. She told me that only someone who's lived through it can understand. It's a living hell. Her job and her friends are supporting her, but Mom's strong. She'll get through this. The hard part will be getting her to trust again. Right now, she doesn't know who or what to believe. Isabella, I said, even with family support, rebuilding trust takes years. It takes an unexpected act of faith. For me, that moment was when you walked into my office. Thank God you did, Grace added with a chuckle. Adam had me convinced I was going to die an old maid waiting for him. Now, girls, stand beside your father so I can snap a few pictures, Grace said, pulling out her phone. The best one will be an 8x10 for his desk. When we stepped off the plane, we were greeted by Grace's parents and her kids. The children nearly knocked me over with their enthusiasm, and their excitement was infectious. My dad grinned, clearly enjoying how they called me Dad. Logan, I realized, would now have 2 older sisters and 1 younger, just like I did growing up. Chloe ran over to hug my mom and said, I'm so happy you're going to be my grandmother. As I stood there, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly my life had transformed with these unexpected blessings. Grace and I decided to postpone some of our initial plans until after the wedding, giving us time to settle into the changes. Grace knew what we needed in a home, so I let her take charge of the house hunt while I focused on writing my first fiction novel. My previous works had been about exposing corruption and cover-ups, but now, I was ready to try something new. We stayed in regular contact with the twins, and Grace soon found the perfect place, a beautiful 20-acre property with an old barn that needed a bit of love. Sophia was recovering well and had even started attending school part-time. We hired an architect to design our dream home, which would be made of steel and brick, complete with an outdoor kitchen, a large patio, a pool, and a 4-bay garage. With Grace cutting back on her office hours, I had more time to focus on my writing. With the help of an editor, I managed to finish over 300 pages, and I finally published my first book under my real name. In the meantime, Carolyn had used my lawyer to secure a divorce from Matthew. She won alimony and ensured her daughter's education would be covered. My lawsuits were in mediation, and the opposition had lost the will to keep fighting. Finally, the day came when Chloe, Logan, Grace, and I eagerly awaited the twins' arrival after their last day of school. Logan, sharp-eyed as always, was the first to spot them pulling up the new driveway in their Ford Explorer. We rushed outside to greet them. As Sophia stepped out of the car, I was taken aback by how well she looked. The resemblance between her and Isabella was now undeniable. Grace leaned in and whispered, "We'll figure it out." Logan, already slipping into his role as the protective big brother, grabbed their luggage while Grace proudly showed off the house. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more thrilling tales and updates.